Well, thank you for the introduction. This is a class today from the BYU uh, Library Family History Center, and the class is called Genealogical Periodicals as a Research Opportunity. So we're going to talk about periodicals. Just kind of a note on my presentations, which have been going on now for a few months and will continue extensively in the future, is that a lot of what I present now is AI or artificial intelligence assisted various programs that I use, primarily Microsoft Image Creator and Microsoft Chat, Bing Chat, it's called. So there's a number of different programs out there. The main reason that they're being used is because of copyright issues with most of the images that I can find. And so in order to avoid any conflict from that regard, I'm trying to use as much of the AI as I can so that I don't have a copyright problem. Okay, well, let's get into it. Just kind of introduction, because periodicals is perhaps a word you've heard in conjunction with libraries, and they include newspapers, magazines, journals, newsletters, and other serial publications. The generic term for them in libraries is serials, and that what it means is any publication, anything that's published from time to time is either expanded or is supplemented. It could be daily, like kind of like newspapers were or are. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly, it could be annually. It could be just over a period of time, from time to time, another edition or another volume is added. So these are all termed to be serials, and generally in libraries, the serials are kept separate from the stacks, which are generally used for other research materials, primarily books. And I guess this is more for the convenience of the library than the convenience of the users, but it has been the case ever since I was a child and started going in libraries. So it's very, very important to understand that concept. In the context of what I'm doing, there are literally millions of periodicals of various types, and it would be impossible for me to give more than a limited amount of information about any of them. So I have to understand that I'm giving you a limited number of examples, but the examples that I give are kind of generic in the sense that when I say, here's this type of periodical and give you a specific example of a periodical, that means you can go out and search on that topic and get maybe thousands and thousands of periodicals on that same subject. Now, genealogy is not as expansive as other topics. I mean, if you look on psychology or you went to on physics or something, the number of periodicals specifically for that topic would be rather extensive. But genealogical periodicals are still rather more extensive than you can possibly imagine if you haven't gotten into using this particular type of resource. So to kind of get started with the way to be introduced to the topic is from the Allen County Public Library in Indiana, and it is basically have for years and years have been accumulating genealogical materials from different newsletters and magazines and other periodicals, basically doing an index of them all, and it's called the Periodical Source Index. And they have, to give you an idea of the scope, 3.1 million citations to various periodicals. So this is something of a massive amount of information that is available to genealogists. Now, when they say they've been indexed, some time ago, a couple of years ago, the Genealogical Center made an agreement with Find My Past, a big genealogical program out of Great Britain, and they began to index and digitize more of these materials. Well, eventually they spun that off, and that's now back under the direction of the Allen County Public Library. And so this is the source index for these sources. And it's called
James,
PERSI, P-E-R-S.
James, can
Yes.
you can you please repeat about the catalog? This was a in the chat from Sherry, and then also Karen wants to know, how did you say you access the library catalog?
Okay, so why don't I do this? Let's show everybody that while we're on being recorded. I will have to, no, well, I'm going to have to stop sharing to do it. So I'll just explain it, okay? Okay, the catalog, when you go on to familysearch.org, you basically, what you do with that is you go to the search menu at the top of the page. You have to sign in. You have to be signed in as a registered user. It's free. There's no problem from that. But when you click on the search, there's a drop-down menu, and you'll see records, images, etc. And then you'll see the catalog. And that catalog, when you open it, is the standard catalog that you're used to seeing on Family Search, if you ever use the catalog, which you should. But forget Family Search at this point. Go to Google or to whichever search engine you're using and go look for the Family Search library catalog. One of the pages that comes up will be the Family Search Library Catalog page. There are two catalogs. One is the Family Search Library Catalog. The other one's just the catalog. There's explanations about both on that page. What you see on Family Search, the catalog, when you pull it up, is out of date about a year. I hope that helps to clarify. Okay, we'll go back to periodicals. So here's for example, what I said here is that here's the address. But if you do a search for PERSI, P-E-R-S-I, genealogy or periodicals, it will come up with the link. This is the Allen County Public Library website, just so you understand what that is. This is another one of the big websites online that have genealogical resources, and the library is one of the largest libraries in the United States that has specifically genealogical information. So if you want more information about PERSI, about the Periodical Source Index, you can go to familysearch.org, Research Wiki, and the Research Wiki has an article on the Periodical Source Index. So basically go search by place or topic. You could type PERSI into that, and it would bring you to this page, and you would get more information about how the Periodical Source Index or PERSI works. Okay, so historically, if we go back, particularly in the United States, and I'm focusing on the United States, but there are journals and publications in many, many parts of the world that are currently available. But the first genealogical journal was the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, and that began in 1847. It says published by the Society on the example that I got here, but it's the New England Historic Genealogical Society. It's probably a little, depending on your screen, you may not see the little design or logo on the front of this old copy of the register. Many of the early registers of journals, all of these early things, if it's before about 1928, information on these are usually available as a general search on the internet. It may be on Google, it could be on archive.org, they could be on some library collections, and they can be digitized and totally available, all the volumes. So there's just a whole, like I said at the beginning of this, I can only give limited examples because to go through the whole problem could take me 2 or 3 hours just to finish the discussion and show all the different parts of how do you get to all these different places. But generally speaking, if you search for journals and genealogy or any of the names associated, like periodicals or serials or anything that you would think would be, or newsletters or whatever the other topics are, and you put the word genealogy with it, then these kinds of publications will come up on a regular search, online search. Just as a matter of note, lately, Microsoft has been giving Google a good run for its money, and I have started to use Microsoft's Edge browser and a Bing search engine. And it is basically now in getting into the position where in the past it was not even a clear second, it was kind of way down there, but now I would give it a very high, much higher degree of usefulness, primarily because of the implementation of artificial intelligence, which which Microsoft is clearly in the lead on that by far at the present time. That could happen to change tomorrow, but it's the way it is today. Here is one of the more recent volumes of the register. It's from spring 2023. And instead of calling it the New England Historical Genealogical Register, they just cut it down to the NEHG register. So this is the current publication. If you join the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and with that, you can also gain access to the American Ancestors website. And as a part of that, you can pay a little bit of more money and get a paper copy of the register, or you can read it online for the membership fee that you pay. Journals are a whole category of publications. Now, here's the important thing to understand. When you're doing research on genealogy in any country, and I'll, like I said, I'm primarily thinking about or working here with the United States, but it's an example of what can happen in any other major developed country around the world. And so basically, when you call this particular is a title page of contents of this particular volume, the spring volume of the New England Historic and Genealogical Register, which they now call the Register. But you can see here that there are articles about the individual people and individual families. And when you start thinking about all the publications that have gone on for well over 100 years and close to now to 200 years, you're to the point where you can think of this as it's not out of date. There's no such thing in genealogy. Things don't go out of date. Your ancestors don't go out of date. Somehow or another, you're waiting for new ancestors to show up back in your line. Well, they will be if you do research, because they'll be new to you, but they're certainly been there all the time kind of ancestors. So the fact that some of these editions are back in the 1800s or into the early 1900s, that doesn't matter at all, because if the research that was done back there is valid then, it's valid now. Now, they're not, they're like any other genealogical publication. The amount of information that is in these articles, it depends on the accuracy and the research that was done by the person. And what you will find in journal articles and in a lot of other of the periodicals like this are that you have individuals who are working with these families, and these articles may not be just the only article. It may be that this researcher wrote an article and then somebody responded with a different article and a different set of facts and conclusions. And then there's another one about that. And so part of the research that's important to do here is to research these in depth by the person. The names are going to show up in all these articles. And so if you start looking online directly for your ancestors, if you put in a name, for example, to pull one here off of this, James Pitney of Ipswich. If you put in a search for James Pitney of Ipswich, that's Massachusetts, Marshfield in Boston, Massachusetts, or just whatever, then you were likely to find this periodical. It's been digitized. Whether it's searchable online is another question. This one in spring of 2023 is definitely going to be copyright protected. And access to the journal is going to be only if you were, in this case, had a subscription, as I mentioned, to American Ancestors. So there's going to be some limitations in that regard, but the information here is going to be available subsequently, as long as the copyright date today is in the range of the 1920s, 1928. So different as time passes, then in the United States, all of these publications go out of copyright and become part of the public domain. And so even eventually, even though the copyright term in the United States is tremendously long, things do go into the public domain. And once they're there, they have a tendency to be digitized and, as I mentioned, put into larger websites or collections, like from libraries or from online collections like Google and archive.org, archive.org, archive.org. One of the other basic publications on genealogy that occurred in the United States occurred by a person named Donald Lyons Jacobus, and he founded the American Genealogists and was very active in the genealogical community and has started the National Genealogical Society, or NGS as it's called. And Donald Jacobus was an attorney, and some of the other people around him were attorneys, and they came from a research background. I'm going to have to question that statement. I'm not sure that I know there were other attorneys around him, but whether he was or not, I can't remember at this moment. So I will take that back. But they were all professional genealogists. They were doing genealogical research for a fee, and they began this publication to have a place where they could publish their articles and all of their findings, basically like an academic community. Now, if you understand university academics, you know that in a lot of cases, professors have to publish. That's part of their responsibility for research at universities and colleges. And so they gain prominence in their field by publishing. And this is also a benefit, of course, to researchers who are given the benefit of reading their articles and their conclusions. You put this into the general category of user-submitted genealogical information. Good academic journals and academic articles will have sources, and it's very important if you have some family that you are researching and you find them in an academic journal like the American Genealogist or the NEGHS. If you find them in the other journals, they will have their sources, which means they'll have links to or information about where they got their information. And so this is very important to take it a step further and go look and use their information to do further research. So this is a whole different type of thing that rather than just looking up some documents on a website, it's a whole world of information that you can get into by using these periodicals. So here's a couple of the places that I've already mentioned: Google Books and archive.org. They can go back, and this is volume 1, number 1. This would be the first one published in 1899, and you will understand that there's may be a different American genealogist than the one that was just published. This is one that does go back to 1899, and they may have used the American genealogist in the later publications. So you just have to start being aware of the history of these organizations. And from my perspective, the older ones, for instance, in 1899 journal articles like this, a magazine that was published for $1 for a year, which would be pretty expensive today. Basically, think about this. Who was alive in 1899? If you think of your parents, my great, great, great grandparents, were probably alive in 1899. And if you're young, if you're a lot younger than I am, my great grandchildren, for example, it would be their great back grandparents. Those were the people that were alive. And so they are potentially people who were giving actual information at the time. And their own parents and their own grandparents would be going back into the 1700s and then possibly into the 1600s. So in this case, what you're looking at is an article that talks about a specific part of the country. In this case, it seems to be coming out of Pennsylvania. That would be invaluable in going back into almost into the earliest times. So when you're talking here about an article on this page, it's called Moravian Immigration to Pennsylvania from 1742 to 1763. You're talking about people whose grandparents and great-grandparents were in this group. And so they were probably could have known these people firsthand. And that is a tremendous reason, a logical reason for using this particular kind of publication. Now, there's another category here, and these are categories. These are generic categories. Remember, I said that earlier, that when you're looking at a journal, there are lots of journals out there. There are journals published locally. There's journals published all over the country. And so you just need to be careful to do that kind of research, because now you're aware that that's entirely possible. So when you go to another category, we have genealogical magazines. Now, this is one from, once again, from the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And it's the magazine for American ancestors. And it's talking about a new project that they've been doing. This is a current, more current magazine here of 2023. And it is about a project called 10 Million Names, where they are attempting the project to recover all the names of all of the enslaved people who were brought to America and to the United States. And so this is a major project that's being started already, and many of the genealogical communities organizations are associated with this, including Family Search and others. And just kind of understand that the commercial magazines are magazines, and they have the kinds of things that would draw readership and people who are going to come and casually look at it and learn about things, or who are more serious in other things. But there's always going to be stories and advertising and things having to do with the sponsor of the magazine. Like with American Ancestors, you're going to see the people who are in charge and all their kinds of commissions and their discussions in those magazines. And this one is not, and Family Tree magazine has been around for quite a while. And this is just one of many periodicals. Now, there were more of these magazines, the commercially type magazines, as you would expect, have taken a great toll as we get more and more information online. And so they've really begun to go to almost all electronic kind of publications. So you can subscribe to the magazine online and have the information. And if you do subscribe, generally speaking, that gives you access to all of the previous editions that have been digitized. So there's another way to get information. The articles here may or may not have footnotes. They may or may not deal with specific families. Usually not. Usually they're going to have more general kind of topics or general ideas rather than having anything specifically about a specific family. Genealogical Society newsletters. Okay, I would say that almost the larger counties in the United States, probably the majority of all the counties in the United States have a historical society or a genealogical society. This is something that's common throughout the United States. So if you type in the name of a county, for instance, Yuma County, Arizona, and you look for the Historical Society, you probably find it. And what's the difference between a historical society and a genealogical society? Basically, the name. The historical societies generally are looking at the local history, but the people in the county are the local history. And so you're always going to find information about genealogical information in the historical magazines and the historical society magazines. And in some states, there are dozens of historical societies, not just one. So here in Utah, I'm pretty sure there's a historical society in every single county of Utah. And genealogical societies, there's a number here in this state also. But it's the same in almost everything across the United States. It's something that's very commonly available. And in this case, this is a local county society. Utah County is a county, and Utah Valley is part of Utah County, and this was established. This particular one is called Utah Valley Technology and Genealogy Group, and I happen to be a member of this one, and I have been for many, many years. So this is a monthly publication, and it contains a tremendous amount of information. Is not an insubstantial newsletter. It is a newsletter that or publication that has a substantial amount of information. I mean, pages, 20, 30 pages. It's like a small book being published every month. So these are quite valuable for a lot of information. Now, one thing that in addition to the information that's provided in these publications is that when you find a publication like this, you're going to be introduced to a lot of local genealogists. So when you come here, you're going to learn about the people who are actively involved in the genealogy of the area. Now, somebody may give an article or write an article for one of these publications who lives anywhere in the world, but primarily you're going to find that the people who are involved in the local genealogical and historical societies are local people. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're having trouble finding resources for the history and genealogy of a specific area, and when I'm talking about specific area, I mean really specific areas like a town in Iowa or a town in Ohio or a village in Pennsylvania, then the county historical society is going to give you the people who know where those records are. They can tell you whether they're in a public library, in the university libraries, at the state library. They are basically going to be aware of the local information about that area. So looking at these articles and the journal entries and things is more than just a kind of, oh, read this and, oh, that was interesting. No, it's not that kind of things. These are basic educational and research assistance. They're going to help you do things that you otherwise would not be able to do without the support and information coming from these. And there are and believe that there's another world online that has the same kinds of things. Facebook, for example, and other social networking programs also have a tremendous amount of information and contacts with genealogists around the world. So if you want to, now here's Roots Web, which is a website. And you can go to rootsweb.com or do a search for the list of genealogical societies. So here's a list of genealogical societies. Now, one thing that is another thing that's important about genealogical societies, the thing that is noteworthy and on this list is you'll see that these are ethnic or specific or country specific genealogical societies. These are called affinity societies, meaning that the people who belong to these societies have something in common. They have something that they share. And one of the things that comes out in genealogical societies are people who share an ethnic background. And you'll see here's African Americans, Canadians, American French, Jewish genealogical societies, Czechoslovak societies, German, Hispanic, Irish. In addition to that, there are lots of societies that are formed as the descendants of a particular group or organization. The most famous ones you'll hear about are the Mayflower Society, which is the society of the descendants of the Mayflower. And there's also Daughters of the American Revolution and Sons of the American Revolution. And here in Utah, we have the Daughter of the Utah Pioneers. We have lots of different, there are the societies like that all over the country. And inevitably, they have memberships and they have applications. And they also identify the people very, very exhaustively about that they're affinity to. So, for example, in California, they have a group of people called the Californios, who were the descendants of the original Spanish settlers or people from Mexico and Spain who came to California, and the descendants have the organizations, and they have identified these people. So if you find that you're from, let's say, Pennsylvania, you probably are going to find a society of people who came to Pennsylvania, one of the groups, the Germans and the others who came to Pennsylvania on early dates. And that their societies are going to have already identified all these people, like the Mayflower Society. They're all identified, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's national, state, local, and this is an example of the Villages Genealogical Society in the Villages, Florida. And there's issues of their magazine or their newsletter. And so there'd be lots, and and you'll see here's they've got special interest groups, surname research database. When my wife and I were living in Annapolis, Maryland, and working on digitizing records for family search at the Maryland State Archives, we joined the local Genealogical Society. And so that was a way to meet genealogists who were there during the time we were there. It was the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society. So, there's just it's a way to gain a certain information. And a lot of times they'll be glad to have you join their society, even if you live someplace else, if your ancestors are from there, because then you have access to the local people who may be able to help you with your research. Here's another local society, the Hancock County Historical Society, and that's in Illinois, Hancock County. And my ancestors lived for a time in Hancock County. And when I visited the Hancock County Historical Society, it was in Carthage, Illinois. And what I found there was a card catalog, an old card catalog that was quite large. And it had information. And what they said indicated was this is a card catalog of every landowner that has ever owned land in Hancock County. And of course, I'm not sure at the time, this was a few years ago, but that had not been digitized and was only available if you actually physically went into the Hancock County Historical Society. The information that might be available could be literally overwhelming as far as finding things that you would otherwise spend a tremendous other time finding it and may not be available in any other format. This is a look at the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. And once again, they were formed in 1897, so they're well over 100 years now of of research. This is what you would call an affinity society, but in order to join, you have to, in a sense, demonstrate through your application that your ancestor really was one of the Mayflower descendants, that you are a Mayflower descendant. And the requirements are rather strict, and they've gotten more strict over the years. And so basically what we're looking at is a lot of gathered information about their descendants. And because of this, the Mayflower Society has published a series, and this is a series, so it's a serial of books about each of the surviving Mayflower families who survived the first year. None of the others had children that survived the first year. Nobody, whoever it was that survived that first year in the Americas, in Plymouth Colony. And so this is the project. So there are 5 generations of the descendants of each of these families. So if you want to connect to the Mayflower, you simply have to connect back to one of the people that's identified here in one of these silver books. So that would save a lot of time and a lot of your effort. And if you're thinking that you have Mayflower ancestors and you're not familiar with the silver books and you're not using those as the basis of your research, you're just wasting your time, because you are simply not going to get the right information if you start trying to do all this research yourself. They have spent over 100 years, and I'm guessing many millions of dollars in researching this information. And if you think you can outguess these people, then I would suggest you try, because they have basically done their research and they have the sources. Of course, newspapers are periodicals, and newspaper collections are all over the internet. I've just recently, I think in the last week or two, did a presentation, a class that should be up on the BYU Libraries Family History Center YouTube channel about newspapers, and specifically about newspapers that are available. But so this particular type of record is tremendously valuable. Newspapers date clear back into the 1600s in Europe and even here in the United States, in the former colonies. And so there's a tremendous amount of information in this particular collection. For example, the digitized records back to 1770 on the Library of Congress website. This is Chronicling America, Historic American Newspapers. At the time of this screenshot, there were more than 20.7 million records, newspaper pages, full pages of information. And I've used this website many, many times, probably hundreds of times, because the information here is so valuable. And there are other huge collections out there on a local basis. So here's one here in Utah. It's called the Utah Digital Newspaper Project. What happened here is that the Library of Congress, a number of years ago, made a substantial grant to each of the states if they would form a local newspaper project. Some of them did a pretty good job and others did not. But in this case, Utah did an exhaustive, based on a partnership with the University of Utah. And the newspapers here are a tremendous asset to doing research on the history and the genealogy of people in Utah. But there are projects in almost every state. Some of them are exceptionally good, and some of them are not so good, not so complete. But there are other collections, and my previous presentation shows this is a very bad copy of an article, but it's interesting from the standpoint, this talks about my great-grandfather, Sidney Tanner, and he died. And it says that he came to Utah in the fall of 1845, which is quite a notable thing to have in the newspaper. And then, of course, if you can't see it, but they also misspell his name as Midney, instead of Sydney. But if you live in Utah, you know that 1845 doesn't make any sense because the first pioneers got here in 1847. So they're kind of 2 years. And I really don't think Sydney got here above the first group of pioneers, because he came later because they were assisting earlier pioneers to come across. Okay, so there are commercial newspaper collections. Of course, you have to understand that is going to be something. If newspapers are not just valuable genealogically, they're valuable historically. They're valuable in everything from lawsuits to whatever. You can imagine how many different uses there are. Granted, newspapers.com, which is part of ancestry.com, and it's a separate subscription. So if you are if you have Ancestry, you will continually get references in doing research on Ancestry to newspapers.com, but unless you have a newspapers.com subscription, you won't be able to see the articles directly. So it gets to be kind of frustrating. But on the other hand, it's a valuable asset. And libraries like the BYU Family History Center library will have subscriptions to newspapers.com that you can use when you come into the library. So another option for going to some of these commercial collections is to check in your local university and city and state libraries to see if you have access. It's always important when you're doing history, any kind of research on history or genealogy, is to check local libraries, check universities, special collections, libraries, historical societies, and I mentioned genealogical societies, state libraries, the national affinity organizations. These are all the things that I've talked about. And this is part of the process of doing research. One of the statements over the years, I now don't say this very commonly because I don't get the opportunity from people who come to me and they say, I have looked everywhere. I've been looking for the last 15, 20 years. I have just searched everywhere for this person. And my initial response, because I was a little more, I guess, rude when I was younger, would be, well, oh, how did you like the New York Public Library? And they would go, what? What are you talking about? My people weren't from New York. Oh, but the New York Public Library is one of the largest genealogical libraries in the United States. And I would assume that if you'd looked everywhere, you would have looked in the New York Public Library. Well, anyway, the point's up, even though it's kind of a not being so kind response, it's basically true that you cannot, if you understand what I've been talking about here, you can't say that you've searched everywhere unless you start going down into these kinds of searches. You've got to do what you would call a reasonably exhaustive search, using a terminology from the Board on Certification of Genealogists, would include local resources. And so if you haven't done local resource search, then you haven't done the research. We found, for instance, since some of my ancestors that I mentioned came from Hancock County, we found references to my wife's ancestors, who also came through Hancock County, and across the river in Iowa, in the Keokuk, Iowa Public Library. So, I mean, you have to have the mentality that there's always more records and you're just not aware of where they might be kept. So ultimately, you're going to have to visit the local areas and ask questions. I mean, this is the end of where you're getting into the source. If you get to this point, I would suggest you have done an extensive amount of research online and in your own libraries and what you have available locally before you get in your car and start driving, as you're going to get the answer at some point in time, and it may be unsettling, that when you ask for information at the local level, they will say, oh, that's in the, oh, we have everything we've given to the Allen County Public Library or to the Family Search Library in Salt Lake. So you need to be aware that those are the kinds of things you're going to get. So you might want to use your imagination and keep looking. And thanks for watching.
James, there's one question in the Q&A. It's, can you
Okay.
expect to find anything on ancestors who weren't rich or prominent?
The answer to that is absolutely yes. This has nothing to do with economic status. This has to do with people living in a specific place at a specific time. One of the most common things is, as you go across the United States, somebody was always the first person, or the first group of people were already the first settlers, we'll call them, in any specific county. And those first settlers are usually the people that everybody knows about. And the families that live there are usually their descendants in some way. Usually, it's very common that there's descendants of the first settlers living in the same county. One time when I was back in Rhode Island, where my ancestors came from, I went to a church meeting, and they said, well, you've got to meet this guy as your cousin. And I said, okay, fine. And he had a direct line. He was a direct line ancestor, cousin of mine, going back 12 generations. His parents, grandparents, all the way back 12 generations, and my parents were the same people. And he was live, and he knew a significant amount about his family. So, you can never put that down. It's always important to focus. It just depends on, if you know a lot about it already and you're kind of overwhelmed with the amount of information you know about a grandparent, then just keep going back and you'll find one that isn't that easy to find. Okay.
There's also a follow-up. I suppose it would be another presentation for England.
Yes, and there's all the same things in England. In fact, more of the same. England and Germany particularly are extremely active. All of the British Isles, not just England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, all of those people are very active genealogically. And so there's, contacting that, getting into their different organizations and getting into and understand will also give you a great amount of information.